3 days before my brother's wedding, my mother cornered me in the sitting room. She thrust a starched white apron into my hands, her fingers curling around my wrist with practiced disappointment. "You're not one of us, Victoria," she said quietly, her voice like ice wrapped in velvet. "You're a guest here. Now make yourself useful." She thought she was putting a disobedient daughter in her place. She had no comprehension whatsoever that she was speaking to a 2-star general of the British Army and the sole owner of the property beneath her feet. Her eviction notice had already been drafted by my solicitor. My name is Major General Victoria Ashford. I'm 42 years old, and I was driving through the Surrey Hills on that gray October afternoon when the weight of her words finally caught up with me. The Range Rover moved smoothly along the winding country lanes, past the golden-leafed oaks and birches that marked the season's turning. The leaves were falling now, carpeting the road in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, yes, but also the color of decay. Everything about this place felt like a ghost. The perfectly manicured gardens, the private lanes bordered by mature hedgerows. The kind of neighborhood where old money lived quietly behind high stone walls, where silence was a luxury and discretion was currency. After 14 years stationed across Afghanistan, the Ministry of Defense corridors, and 3 years commanding operations from tactical centers in the Middle East, this suburban perfection felt like a museum of someone else's life. Then the house appeared through the trees. It dominated the landscape just as it always had. A Victorian Gothic revival mansion, all pale sandstone and mullioned windows, with ivy creeping across the east wing. Turrets at each corner. A gravel drive that swept in a perfect curve. The gardens beyond stretched for 3 acres, rolling downhill toward the boundary wall. It wasn't just a house. It was a monument to everything my mother believed mattered. Prestige, heritage, the appearance of effortless superiority. I parked near the entrance and killed the engine. The silence was absolute, just the distant sound of rooks calling from the ancient oaks. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, and let myself feel the familiar dread that always accompanied a return home. I used my own key to let myself in. The entrance hall was exactly as I remembered it, all soaring ceilings and an elaborate Victorian staircase. Everything smelled of beeswax and the faint lavender that my mother had placed in bowls throughout the house. My eyes went immediately to the grand staircase wall, to the space where my West Point photograph, no, correction, my Royal Military Academy Sandhurst photograph, used to hang. I was ramrod straight in dress uniform, my face bright with the pride of a girl who had finally found her place in the world. It was gone. In its place hung an enormous oil portrait. My mother, Catherine, and my younger brother, James. They were posed at some charity gala, my mother swathed in couture silk, my brother in a perfectly tailored dinner jacket. Their smiles were radiant, effortless, the smiles of people who had never questioned whether they belonged anywhere. I had been erased completely, as if my 20 years of service had been nothing more than an embarrassing gap in the family narrative. Catherine emerged from the drawing room, a glass of pale Chablis in her hand. She wasn't alone. A woman in sharp-tailored blacks accompanied her. The wedding planner, I assumed. My mother's eyes, the same ice blue as my own, swept over me from head to toe. She catalogued my simple wool jumper and jeans, her gaze lingering on my worn leather boots. I could see her mental calculations running behind her eyes, her silent assessment that I was utterly lacking. "Victoria, your room is upstairs, next to the storage cupboard," she announced, loud enough for the wedding planner to hear. "You'll find fresh towels in the airing cupboard. Do help yourself." She turned away mid-sentence, resuming her conversation about table settings as though I were a delivery person who had just deposited a parcel and was now dismissed. I stood alone in the marble entrance hall, feeling like a specter haunting the house of my childhood. That evening, the house filled with the low murmur of power, my mother's inner circle, a carefully curated collection of London's elite, MPs, merchants, hedge fund managers, women who served on charity boards that controlled millions in charitable giving. They moved through the rooms with the easy confidence of people accustomed to being the most important people in every space they occupied. I attempted to make conversation, to find some neutral ground, but I felt like an anthropologist studying an alien species rather than someone who had been born into this world. It was during the reception that Catherine made her move. She approached me with that fixed, brilliant smile. The smile of a woman performing for an audience. Before I could brace myself, she pressed something crisp and white into my hand. An apron. White cotton, starched to painful stiffness. "Victoria, darling," she said, her voice a sweet, poisonous melody. "You're not acquainted with most of our guests. How about you help the staff with the canapés? You're so used to serving, after all, aren't you?" She said it loud enough for 6 people to hear. A public indictment delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. Several of the nearby guests offered stifled, polite chuckles. Nervous laughter. The kind that happens when people witness a minor cruelty and aren't quite sure how to respond to it. I glanced across the room toward my brother. James was speaking with a government minister, discussing his latest architectural project, some obscenely expensive residential development in Chelsea. When he heard our mother's words, he offered me nothing more than a small, dismissive shrug before turning back to his conversation. He was complicit in his indifference, a willing accomplice to her cruelty. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck, burning across my face. In that moment, I wasn't a 2-star general with 14 years of active service. The medals on my chest, the ones I'd earned through blood, sweat, and decisions that still haunted my nights, felt like they had been stripped away. I was just a helper, a prop, an inconvenience wearing a starched white apron, a woman with a kind face. One of Catherine's friends from a charity committee asked me what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Catherine swept in, placing a proprietary hand on my arm. "Oh, Victoria has some sort of administrative position with the government," she announced brightly, as if discussing a mildly interesting hobby. "Very stable, of course, but terribly dry." Administrative, the word was deliberately chosen to sandpaper my career down to something small, boring, and utterly unimpressive. I was officially erased. My throat tightened. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I didn't say a word. I simply nodded at the kind woman, extracted myself from my mother's grasp, and walked away. The party continued behind me, oblivious. I moved through the house and into the kitchen, where the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded into a dull, distant hum. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I untied the apron strings. I held the starchy white fabric in my hands for a moment, then let it drop into the stainless steel bin, directly onto a pile of discarded lemon peels. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a silent declaration. Sleep did not come that night. In the sterile guest room, the one next to the storage cupboard, the image of the white apron dropping into the bin replayed itself repeatedly in my mind. It was a sharp, clean memory, but muddled by a single question that had haunted me for 2 decades. Why does she hate what I am so much? There was only one place I could go to find an answer. Before dawn, I was back in my Range Rover, driving through the sleeping suburbs toward Brookwood Cemetery. The morning was gray and misty, the kind of October morning that belonged entirely to autumn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Brookwood is the largest cemetery in the UK. Row upon row of military headstones, each one a small white stone marking a life given to service. The silence here was different from the silence in my mother's house. This wasn't a weaponized silence. It was reverent, profound, holding the weight of countless stories of sacrifice and duty. I found his marker easily. The grass around it was perfectly trimmed. The stone was simple, elegant. Colonel Edward Ashford, Royal Artillery. I stood before it, my breath pluming in the cold air, my father. The only person who had ever truly seen me. Closing my eyes, I could almost feel the cool Surrey evening from years ago. I was a girl again, sitting with him on the back porch, our heads tilted up toward the vast inky canvas of the sky. He wasn't just showing me the constellations, he was teaching me to navigate. "Your mother only sees the brightest stars, Victoria," he'd said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. His finger traced the patterns in the darkness. Orion, Cassiopeia, the plow. She likes things that glitter, things that announce themselves to the world. But a true navigator, a true soldier, knows it's the dimmer stars, the ones you have to search for, that guide you when you're lost in the darkness. Be a dim star, my love. Be quiet. Be constant, and never lose your heading. His words echoed across the years. The memory of my acceptance to Sandhurst surfaced, sharp and painful. I had been 17, holding that thick, important-looking envelope in my hands. My heart had been hammering with a joy so pure it felt like it could lift me off the ground. I showed it to Catherine. She took it, her perfectly manicured fingers barely touching the paper, and tossed it onto the mahogany dining table as if it were rubbish. "You're ruining your life, Victoria," she had declared, her voice absolutely devoid of warmth. "You'll become hard and unfeminine. No decent man from the home counties will want to marry a soldier." There was no pride, no congratulations. Just a life sentence handed down by someone who was supposed to love me. That same week, my brother James won a regional architecture competition, a simple certificate and a ribbon. Catherine threw a lavish garden party in celebration, over 100 guests, caterers, a string quartet, champagne. All for a child's school award. But my father, my quiet, constant star, had found a way. He'd snuck me out of the house that evening, away from the tinkling laughter and forced smiles. He drove us into Soho, to this little Italian cafe he loved called Romano's. We sat at the counter and he ordered us his favorite thing, a proper carbonara and a glass of wine. The meal was unpretentious, delicious, and utterly real in a way nothing in Catherine's world ever was. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you your dreams aren't worth celebrating?" he'd said, his voice firm over the cafe's happy chaos. "Not ever. Your dreams matter, Victoria. And so do you." Now, standing at his grave, I could almost taste the carbonara. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a challenge coin from my old regiment. It was heavy and cool in my palm, a soldier's tradition, a token left for a fallen comrade. I leaned down and placed it carefully on top of his headstone. The metal made a soft, definitive click against the stone. "Dad," I whispered, my words meant only for him. "I'm not lost. I'm just in the dark right now. But I remember your lesson. I remember the stars." A new resolve settled into my heart. It wasn't the hot fire of rage. It was something colder, far stronger. It was determination, pure, crystalline, focused. I was going to reclaim my story. I was going to make sure the world knew exactly who I was. I turned away from the grave and walked back toward the car. The morning mist was beginning to burn off, and the first rays of sunlight were piercing through the trees, glinting off the endless rows of white stone. Driving away from Brookwood, I realized that my entire adult life had been lived exactly as my father described. A journey along the path of the dim star, 14 years of service, 14 years of building something with my own two hands, 14 years that my family had chosen to ignore. The memories came back not as a gentle stream but as a series of vivid, sharp snapshots. Sandhurst. The endless nights shivering in cold, wet mud during field exercises, my muscles screaming. The grueling physical trials that pushed me to the edge of collapse. My lungs burning, my vision tunneling. I remembered the subtle condescension from some of the male cadets, the shock on their faces when I not only kept up but surpassed them in tactical simulations. Their surprise was quiet fuel burning alongside my father's memory. Each small victory was a silent affirmation that I was on the right path, even though it was a lonely one. Then Afghanistan, the memories shifted from the green hills of Yorkshire to the beige, dusty landscapes of Helmand Province. I was a young lieutenant then, leading patrols through remote villages where danger was a constant, invisible companion. My world was the weight of my gear, the feel of my rifle, and the faces of the soldiers who trusted me with their lives. I learned a language there that had nothing to do with words. I learned to read intent in the flicker of someone's eyes, in the posture of their shoulders, in the terrible silence between distant gunshots. These were lessons in human nature, in survival, that no university could ever teach. One memory remained a permanent, unhealed wound. It was Christmas. I was at a forward operating base in Helmand, stationed there just hours after an ambush that had cost me a good soldier. A young man from Northern Ireland with a photo of his girlfriend taped inside his helmet. I was bone-weary, grieving, and a million miles from anything that felt like home. I managed to get a video call through to the house in Weybridge. The screen flickered to life, revealing the family drawing room. It was like something from a high-end interior design magazine. A towering Christmas tree, its branches weighted with expensive decorations. Catherine and James were laughing, glasses of mulled wine in their hands. They were surrounded by warmth, comfort, and safety. Catherine's smile faltered when she saw me. My face was caked in grime. My eyes were hollow with exhaustion. "Good Lord, Victoria, you look absolutely dreadful," she said. "Are you eating properly?" That was her first question. Not "are you safe?" Not "are you okay?" Not a single word of concern about my well-being. James leaned into the frame, his face beaming. "Hey, sis! Mum just bought me a new Porsche for my promotion." The words struck me with physical force, a new luxury car. A man I'd served with, a man who trusted me to keep him alive, was dead, and my own brother was celebrating a sports car. No one asked about the ambush. No one asked about my men. Then a siren blared on my end. The unmistakable sound of an incoming rocket attack. I had to disconnect. The last thing I heard before the screen went black was Catherine's voice, completely unfazed, turning to James. "Come on, let's go select your outfit for the golf club party." The screen went black, leaving me in the deafening roar of the siren and an even more deafening silence in my heart. Now, years later, I sat in an anonymous Costa Coffee near Guildford, my encrypted government laptop open before me. I scrolled through my inbox, a digital testament to the life my family had refused to see. An official invitation to keynote a major international security conference in Berlin. A commendation from the Ministry of Defense on an intelligence brief I'd authored that had directly influenced national policy. My work had weight. It had meaning. It was recognized at the highest levels. I took a sip of black coffee. A bitter smile touched my lips. The world saw me as a general, a strategist, a leader. I was respected by my peers. I was trusted by my superiors. But in the Victorian mansion in Weybridge, I was still the girl who wasn't good enough. The one who wasn't worth celebrating. The one best suited to wear an apron and serve. The world saw a general. My family saw a ghost. I was still staring at the commendation on my screen when a new email arrived. The subject line was simple: coffee. But it was the sender's name that made my heart skip a beat. Captain Sophie Bennett, my brother's fiancée. I read the email quickly. It was brief and direct, suggesting a meeting at a cafe in Covent Garden. No explanation, just a time and place. My instincts, honed by 14 years of assessing threats, told me this wasn't a social call. This was reconnaissance. The next day, I found the small independent cafe tucked away on a quiet side street in Covent Garden, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local artists' work on the walls. A world away from the sterile perfection of my mother's home. Sophie was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner in civilian clothes, a simple wool jumper and dark jeans. She still carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. She stood when I approached. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." I took the seat opposite her. "Captain." She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "I know what's happening with your mother," Sophie said. "With Catherine. I need you to know that I'm not part of it." I simply listened, my expression neutral. "A year ago, after James started boasting about your family's success, I ran a security clearance verification on you." "Professional due diligence," she continued. "Ma'am, I know who you are. I served under your command in Helmand Province. You pulled my unit out of an ambush in the Arghandab Valley. You saved my life." A jolt went through me. I remembered the firefight. But in the chaos of command, individual faces often blurred together. To her, it was the day she lived. To me, it was a Tuesday afternoon. For the first time, I saw not my brother's fiancé, but a fellow soldier. "I owe you everything." "Ma'am," Sophie said, her voice thick with conviction. "So whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm your soldier. On any battlefield, and that includes this one." The sincerity in her eyes was a balm on a wound I hadn't even known was still open. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing alone in the trenches. "There's someone you should meet," Sophie said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It contained a name and an address in Guildford. Dr. Priya Mehta. She's retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency now. But she knows your mother. She's been expecting your call. The next morning, I drove to the address. It was a discreet townhouse office. The plaque on the door simply read Strategic Consultancy. Inside, it was nothing like what I expected. No soft furnishings, no inspirational posters. It was a war room. Maps of global hotspots were pinned to one wall. A large whiteboard covered in complex diagrams and annotations dominated another. A powerful-looking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked black hair rose from behind a desk. Dr. Priya Mehta. She was a woman of Indian descent who moved with the calm authority of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating power corridors in Whitehall and beyond. "General Ashford," she said, her voice warm but businesslike. Sophie called ahead. "Please, sit." As she poured 2 cups of Earl Grey tea, she got straight to the point. "I've known Catherine Ashford for 28 years through various boards and committees," Priya said, looking me directly in the eye. "I've watched her operate. This isn't just a family conflict, Victoria. Your mother isn't attacking your feelings. She's conducting a systematic campaign of information warfare designed to erase your identity and seize your father's legacy. And we're going to fight back using the same weapons. Truth and precision." The word "we" resonated in the quiet room. Priya opened a desk drawer and placed 2 small items on the polished wood between us. A digital voice recorder no bigger than a lipstick tube. A black encrypted USB drive. "Your mother operates through manipulation and lies spoken behind closed doors," Priya said. "From now on, you gather intelligence. You record everything. You document everything. We're building a case, Victoria. Your case." That evening, the 3 of us met in Priya's war room. A major general, a captain, a retired Defense Intelligence Agency strategist, a chosen family forged in shared purpose. There were no tears, no emotional hand-wringing. We talked tactics. Sophie, using her technical access, pulled up the floor plans and security systems schematics for the wedding venue. Priya began outlining a timeline, identifying key players on the guest list. Journalists, politicians, influential figures who could shift perception. I provided the ground truth. The history of my mother's actions, the psychological profile of my opponent. For the first time, I felt the tide beginning to turn. The lonely path of the dim star was no longer a solo mission. A new constellation was forming. We were drawing up a battle plan to dismantle Catherine Ashford's empire. Not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. It was a campaign fueled by military precision, intelligence, expertise, and the unshakable loyalty of soldiers. The fight for my father's legacy and my own had begun. 2 days after our strategy session, Catherine called. Her voice over the phone was unnaturally warm, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me since childhood. She wanted to have dinner, just the 2 of us, a chance to reconnect before the wedding chaos. My internal alarms screamed warnings. This was a tactical move, but Priya's words echoed in my mind, "Gather intelligence." "I'd like that," I said, my voice carefully neutral before leaving my flat. I activated the voice recorder Priya had given me and slipped it into my clutch. I was no longer just a daughter going to dinner. I was an operative heading into hostile territory. Catherine had chosen the Ivy on West Street, a legendary 3 Michelin-star restaurant, exclusive and impossibly expensive. It was also incredibly public, a favorite haunt of MPs and CEOs, a strategic choice. She knew I wouldn't make a scene there. She was already seated when I arrived, looking immaculate in a silk dress, a single strand of pearls at her throat. Her smile was dazzling, perfected through decades of public relations work. It didn't reach her eyes. "Victoria, darling, you look well," she said, her gaze flicking over my simple black dress with barely concealed judgment. The meal was culinary art. Dish after exquisite dish arrived, each one a masterpiece of technique and presentation. Between bites of food that tasted of nothing, Catherine performed. She spoke of family unity, of standing together. She reminisced about my childhood, cherry-picking vague, happy moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She told me she had always been proud of my career, even if she hadn't always known how to show it. It was a brilliant performance. Every word was a lie. Carefully polished stones laid on a path leading nowhere I wanted to go. The air grew thick with her insincerity. Then, as the dessert course arrived, a stunning 7-layer coconut cake. Catherine reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folder of documents. She slid it across the white tablecloth, placing it directly beside my plate. "Just a small matter of paperwork, dear," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To consolidate the family assets. It will make things so much easier to manage, and it will help James tremendously with his business ventures." My gaze fell to the folder. My heart began to pound. This wasn't consolidation. This was an ambush. I opened the folder. The pages were dense with legal jargon. Certain phrases jumped out immediately. Relinquish all claims. Transfer of title irrevocable. Waiver of inheritance rights. She was trying to steal my father's house from me. Over an expensive dessert at a Michelin-starred restaurant. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I closed the folder and gently pushed it back across the table. "I think I'll need my solicitor to review this first, Mother." The effect was instantaneous. Catherine's perfect smile froze. Her eyes, which had been feigning warmth all evening, turned to chips of ice. The mask was off. "A solicitor?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Victoria, we are family. Don't you trust your own mother? This is a simple family matter. Don't be difficult and complicated. Just sign it." Her hand darted out, her fingers pressing down on the folder, an order disguised as a suggestion. I looked at her hand, then back up at her face, contorted now with bare-concealed fury. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt or shame. I felt clarity. I stood up slowly, my movements calm and measured. I placed a 50-pound note on the table, more than enough to cover my portion and the tip. "My solicitor will be in touch," I said, my voice even and steady. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel her enraged stare burning into my back as I crossed the dining room. The hushed conversations of other diners, the clinking of silverware. All of it faded away. As I stepped out into the cool London night, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The battle had officially begun, and I had just fired the first shot. The moment I arrived back at my flat, I acted. There was no hesitation. My hands were steady as I took out my phone, laid the legal documents flat on my coffee table, and photographed each page methodically. I sent the images to Priya in a secure message. "Tonight's documents." The audio file from the recorder was already uploading to our shared encrypted drive. A few hours later, Priya called. Her voice, usually so calm and strategic, was laced with cold fury. "Victoria, I've had my legal contact review these photos. This isn't a power of attorney. This is a full, unconditional waiver of your inheritance rights to the house. It's airtight." She had it drawn up by a lawyer who specializes in contentious family disputes. She was trying to trick you into signing away your father's home. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to have it confirmed in such brutal legal terms. She had intended to strip me of everything. Then, as if on cue, a text alert pinged. It was from Sophie. No message, just a link. I tapped it with trembling fingers. The link took me to a well-known London society blog, the kind that chronicles the lives of the wealthy and influential in the Southeast. The headlines seemed to leap off the screen in bold, sanctimonious font. The Ashford family and the prodigal daughter, a sad tale of military ambition gone wrong. The article was character assassination, anonymously sourced but clearly fed by Catherine. It painted me as a difficult, reclusive daughter who had abandoned her family to pursue an unsettling military career. It insinuated, with practiced insidiousness, that my time in service had left me with psychological issues, making me unstable and prone to jealousy over my brother's wedding. But the worst part, the part that made the blood freeze in my veins, was the photograph. They had found an old picture of me taken right after a grueling 72-hour operation in a combat zone. I was exhausted. My face was smudged with dirt. My eyes were hollow. They had cropped it, enlarged it, and used it to illustrate their narrative of the unhinged, damaged veteran. It was a violation so profound, so personal, it stole the air from my lungs. They didn't just want to disinherit me. They wanted to destroy me completely, to discredit me so thoroughly that no one would ever listen to a word I said. My service, my sacrifices, the very things that had defined my life. They were twisting them into weapons to use against me. I dropped the phone onto the sofa as if it were on fire. I sank into the darkness of my unlit living room, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside my window. For a moment, I felt the crushing weight of it all. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty. The floor seemed to give way beneath me. And then I remembered my father's voice talking about the dim stars. Priya's voice, telling me to fight back with truth. Sophie's voice, pledging her loyalty. I was not alone in the dark. I reached for my laptop, my movements stiff at first, then more certain. I opened the web browser and searched for a particular BBC special I'd watched years ago. I found it and clicked play, fast-forwarding to the section I needed. A well-known voice filled the silent room, strong and clear, quoting Theodore Roosevelt's timeless words. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle into me, the critics. Catherine James, their soulless friends, the faceless blogger. They were all just spectators, comfortable and safe in the cheap seats, casting judgment on a game they were too cowardly to play. But me? I had always been in the arena. My face had been marred by the dust of Helmand Province. My hands knew the grit of the fight. I had stumbled, I had bled, and I had dared greatly. I opened my eyes. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was cold, crystalline clarity. I picked up my phone. My hand was rock steady. I dialed Priya's number. She answered on the first ring. "Activate everything," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion except for pure, unadulterated resolve. "It's time to enter my arena." The next 48 hours were a blur of focused, relentless preparation. Priya's quiet office in Guildford transformed into a full-fledged command center. The whiteboard, once covered in abstract diagrams, was now a meticulously detailed battle plan. A floor plan of the hotel ballroom was pinned to the center, marked with entry and exit routes, camera blind spots, and optimal lines of sight. Sophie, leveraging her technical expertise, had procured the security system schematics for the venue. We now had control over every microphone and projection screen in the room. We operated with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned military unit. Priya, the strategist, worked her contacts. She compiled a list of key guests, not just the powerful, but the influential. 3 prominent journalists, a handful of social media commentators known for breaking stories. A digital dossier containing every piece of evidence was prepared and encrypted, ready to be deployed at the precise moment. Priya had already briefed a trusted investigative reporter from The Guardian, priming him to expect a package at 0 hour. Sophie was my intelligence officer. She monitored online chatter, tracking the spread of the hit piece Catherine had planted. She created a detailed timeline of the wedding ceremony, predicting moments of maximum impact and opportunity. Every detail was a potential advantage. My role was command. I made a single critical phone call. Using a secure line, I contacted General Michael Ashworth, my former commanding officer and mentor, now a 4-star general at the Ministry of Defense. I didn't complain. I didn't offer emotional backstory. I presented the situation like a field report. A concise, factual briefing on a campaign of misinformation targeting a senior officer. "Sir, I require 2 assets," I said, my voice steady and professional. "The unredacted after-action report for Operation Desert Aegis, and a formal video confirmation of my service record and decorations from the Ministry of Defense." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence heavy with contemplation. General Ashworth was a man of few words but absolute integrity. I knew he understood the unspoken context. "The files will be on a secure server for you within the hour, Major General," he finally said, his voice like gravel and steel. "It's high time the full story of what you and your soldiers did in that valley was properly recognized." He didn't ask for more details. He didn't question my motives. That was the loyalty of the uniform. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. The city lights of Guildford bled through my window blinds, but my focus was entirely within the four walls of my hotel room. I had retrieved my Class A service dress uniform from its protective garment bag. The formal dress blues, the uniform of ceremony, of tradition, of honor. Under the stark light of the desk lamp, I began the ritual of preparing my armor. I laid out the jacket and meticulously began to affix my decorations. Each medal, each ribbon. They were chapters in the life my mother had tried to erase. The mention in dispatches, the Queen's commendation for bravery. The Silver Star for gallantry and action during the very ambush Sophie had survived. The Operational Service Medal, the Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Long Service Medal. Each pin I pushed through the deep blue fabric was a memory. A fallen comrade, a sleepless night, a moment of terror, a surge of pride. They were a metallic language that told the true story of my service, a story of sweat and blood, not the dry administrative fiction my mother had created. I took out my portable steamer. The hiss of hot vapor filled the quiet room. I worked on every inch of the uniform, smoothing out every potential wrinkle, ensuring every crease was razor sharp, every line perfect. The polished brass buttons gleamed like gold coins. The 2 silver stars on each shoulder showed with a cold, hard light. This was more than preparation. It was a transformation. I was shedding the ill-fitting costume of the difficult daughter they had tried to force upon me. I was stepping back into my own skin. When I was finished, I hung the uniform on the wardrobe door. A perfect effigy of honor and discipline. I stood before it, seeing not just a jacket, but the embodiment of my oath. The oath I had taken not to my family, but to something far greater. The grand ballroom of the Savoy in London was a sea of pastel silks, tailored tuxedos, and the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. A string quartet was playing something light and classical. A delicate soundtrack for the union of 2 influential families. My brother James stood at the altar looking handsome and confident. Catherine sat in the front row, the perfect image of the proud matriarch radiating serene, regal calm. The ceremony had just begun. This was 0 hour. As planned, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. But the person who entered was not a late-arriving guest in a flowing gown. It was me. I stepped into the room and a shockwave of silence radiated outwards from the doorway. Every sound ceased. The music faltered. A single violin note dying in the air. The low murmur of 300 guests evaporated. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes locked onto me. I was not wearing a dress. I was wearing my armor. The deep blue jacket of my service dress was immaculate. The brass buttons gleamed. The rows of ribbons on my chest were a vibrant testament to a life they had tried to deny. The 2 silver stars on each shoulder caught and held the light of the chandeliers. I saw Catherine's face. Her serene smile froze, then cracked like fine china dropped on marble. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty chalk-white mask of horror. Beside her, James's jaw went slack. His confident posture crumbled. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning panic. I ignored them all. With my back straight and my gaze fixed forward, I walked with a calm, measured pace down the long aisle. I didn't stop at the front. I found an empty chair in the back row, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap, becoming a quiet, formidable presence at the back of their perfect party. The ceremony sputtered back to life, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The air was thick with tension and whispered questions. The minister, flustered, rushed through the vows. When he reached the classic line, "If anyone has any objection to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." An electric silence filled the room. No one spoke, finally. It was time for the family remarks. Catherine, looking shaken, began to rise from her seat to deliver what I was certain would be a polished, pre-written speech. But she was too late. Someone else was already moving toward the microphone, the bride. Captain Sophie Bennett, a vision in an elegant white gown, stepped to the lectern. She looked breathtaking, but her expression was one of solemn purpose. She did not look at James. She did not look at the audience. She turned her body slightly. directing her attention to the last row. To me, the room held its breath. "Before I begin my new life," Sophie said, her voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone, "I must first honor the person who gave me the chance to have this life at all." She straightened her shoulders in her beautiful white dress. She drew herself up to a position of attention, and then, in a gesture of profound respect and loyalty, she raised her hand to her brow in a sharp, perfect military salute. "To Major General Victoria Ashford," she declared. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The title, spoken with such reverence, hung in the air like a detonation. Major General Catherine's face contorted. "The general sitting in the back row is the woman who saved my life and the lives of 5 other soldiers during Operation Desert Aegis in Helmand Province," Sophie continued, her voice ringing with indisputable truth. That was the cue. At that exact moment, the massive projection screen behind the altar, which had been displaying the bride and groom's monogram, flickered to life. The monogram was replaced by the unredacted after-action report of the mission. My name and rank clearly visible. Then a montage of photographs. Me in the field, me with my unit, me receiving the Operational Service Medal. The screen displayed high-resolution images of my decorations, each one named and explained. And then the final asset, the video from General Michael Ashworth. His stern, authoritative face filled the screen. In his full Class A uniform, he looked directly into the camera and confirmed my rank, my service record, and the circumstances of my commendations. His voice left no room for doubt. Simultaneously, Sophie hit send from her encrypted phone. The phones of every journalist in the room began to buzz and chime. A chorus of incoming alerts. The dossier was delivered. Catherine leapt from her seat, her composure completely shattered. "Stop this!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "This is a lie. All of it is a lie." She lunged toward the stage, a desperate attempt to stop the unstoppable. But it was far, far too late. From the stunned silence of the crowd, a single person began to clap, then another and another. It started slowly, then grew into a wave, a thunderous rolling ovation that shook the entire ballroom. The guests were getting to their feet, not for the bride and groom, but for the soldier in the back row. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding a hero who had finally been seen. I sat perfectly still in my chair in the heart of the storm I had unleashed, and let the sound of my vindication wash over me. In the aftermath of the thunderous applause, an unnerving silence fell within me. The adrenaline that had surged through my veins ebbed away, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. I slipped out of the ballroom unnoticed in the ensuing chaos, leaving the wreckage of my family's perfect evening behind. The battle was over. The next morning, the storm broke. My story was on the front page of The Guardian above the fold. The headline was stark and powerful. "The Invisible General. Ministry of Defense confirms heroism of officer hidden by her own family." The name stuck. I had become a phenomenon. Every major news network picked up the story. The digital dossier Priya had released went viral. Every major outlet reported on my service record, my commendations, my sacrifice, and the blog post that had tried to assassinate my character. It was now held up as an example of malicious deceit. The anonymity of the original source was exposed. It led back directly to Catherine's personal accounts. Catherine's social empire did not just crack. It disintegrated overnight. The boards of the prestigious charities she chaired quietly requested her resignation. The invitations to exclusive London galas and fundraisers stopped coming. The powerful friends who had once flocked to her parties now avoided her calls. Their loyalty had been as shallow as her own values. Her currency, her reputation, had been rendered worthless. The wedding, of course, was officially cancelled. Sophie returned the engagement ring to James that very night, leaving it on the table of the hotel suite he had booked. She was free. 2 days later, James showed up at my flat in Guildford. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His expensive clothes were rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had watched his gilded world collapse. He stood in my doorway, not with an apology, but with an accusation. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice a ragged whisper of disbelief. Everything. Did you have to do it like that? I looked at my little brother, the boy I had once protected on the playground, the man I had tried to love despite the wall our mother had built between us. For the first time, I saw him with perfect, painful clarity. I saw not a victim, but a willing accomplice. I saw the weakness, the entitlement, the profound selfishness that had allowed him to stand by and watch me be erased time and time again. There was no remorse in his eyes, only self-pity. The last vestiges of sisterly affection inside me withered and died. "No, James," I replied, my voice calm and devoid of the anger he clearly expected. "I didn't ruin anything. I just turned on the lights at sluts. Mum's lies and your silence. Your complicity is what ruined everything. You chose your side a long time ago." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He looked like a fish out of water. He was stunned not by my words, but by the fact that they held no anger, no room for argument. They were simply a statement of fact. I closed the door gently in his face. The soft click of the lock was a definitive final sound. The closing of a chapter I should have ended years ago. The final piece of business was the house. My father's house. The stage for all of Catherine's vanities. My solicitor, a sharp, no-nonsense man recommended by Priya, drafted and sent the official notice. It wasn't an eviction. That would have been cruel and vengeful, and my mission was about justice, not revenge. The notice was far more strategic. It informed Catherine that, as the legal owner of the property, I would not be forcing her to leave. Instead, effective immediately, she would be required to pay monthly rent at the current fair market value for a property of that size in Weybridge, Surrey. It was a substantial sum. £15,000 per month. Furthermore, the document stipulated that 100% of that rent money would be paid directly from her account into a charitable trust I had established, the Colonel Edward Ashford Legacy Fund, dedicated to providing scholarships for the children of fallen and wounded service members. My father's house would no longer be a monument to social climbing and empty prestige. It would become what he would have wanted, a true legacy of service. It would educate children. It would support families who, like mine, had sacrificed for this country. It would be a source of honor. Catherine could continue to live in her palace. But now it would be a gilded cage, a constant monthly reminder of her defeat. She would be funding the very values she had spent her life despising. I had drawn my new boundary. It wasn't built of bricks and mortar, or of anger and resentment. It was built of truth, of justice, and of the law. It was a wall she could never tear down. Standing there in my quiet flat, I finally understood what a true inheritance was. It wasn't a house. It was the strength to protect what you hold sacred. The storm passed. The news cycle moved on. In the quiet aftermath, I began to understand the nature of peace. It wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of a quiet internal alignment. The war for recognition was over because I no longer needed it from the outside world. Several months later, an invitation arrived that felt like a message from my father himself. I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony for the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. Standing on that historic rostrum, looking out at the sea of cadets in their crisp dress uniforms, I felt my father's pride swell within me. This was the stage he had dreamed of for me. But as I looked into their young, eager faces, I knew I couldn't talk to them about conventional warfare. They would learn enough about that soon enough. So I spoke about a different kind of combat. "We train you here for the battlefields of the world," I said, my voice steady over the podium. "But I am here to tell you that sometimes the most difficult arena you will ever fight in is the one within your own home. The most courageous act is not always facing enemy fire. It is speaking the truth to those who are supposed to love you. Honor is not just a word we embroider on our flags. It is a boundary you must draw to protect your own soul. It is the choice to stand firm, even when the cost is everything. And it is the decision to become the person you know you are meant to be, regardless of who refuses to see it." Looking out at the future leaders of the army, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost startling. I was giving them the map I never had, the one my father had tried to draw for me in the stars. When I returned to my flat in Guildford, an email was waiting for me. It wasn't from the Ministry of Defense or a news agency. It was from a small foundation called Solace for Soldiers' Children, a scholarship fund I had been quietly financing for years with a portion of my salary. It was my secret legacy, a quiet act of service no one knew about. The email contained a short video file. I clicked play. A young woman appeared on the screen, her face bright with a joy so radiant it was contagious. She was standing in what looked like a university dormitory room, a university banner hanging on the wall behind her. "Hi," she began, a little shy. "My name is Sarah, and my dad was Sergeant David Jensen. He was killed in action in Afghanistan. I was told this video might get to the anonymous donor who funded my scholarship." She took a breath, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just wanted to say thank you. My whole life, people have looked at me with pity. My mom works 2 jobs. University felt like an impossible dream. But you believed in me. Whoever you are, thank you for believing in me when no one else did." The video ended. I sat there in the silence of my flat, tears streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated contentment. The front page stories, the public applause, the forced surrender of my mother. None of it mattered as much as this single heartfelt thank you from a girl I would never meet. This was it. This was my real legacy. Not the medals on my chest. Not the promotions or the commendations. But the quiet impact I could have on a life unseen and uncredited. I was my father's dim star, and I was finally guiding someone home. I turned to my laptop. The view of the Surrey countryside, a calm, steady presence outside my window. I opened a new blank document. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. My fight was over, but I realized I had one more mission. I needed to tell this story. Not for fame, not for vindication, but for the other soldiers out there, for the forgotten sons and daughters, for anyone standing alone in their own arena, feeling invisible. My fingers found the keyboard. I typed the first words. They say home is where the heart is, but sometimes you have to leave home to find your heart again. This is my story, and I chose to tell it because I know I'm not the only one who has fought a battle in silence. Maybe your arena wasn't a ballroom, and maybe your critics weren't your family. But we all have our own struggles for recognition. Our own battles fought where no one else can see. Your story matters. Your fight matters. You matter. If my journey has resonated with you, if something in my experience has touched something in yours, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity, about reclaiming your power, about becoming who you were always meant to be, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge. Thank you for listening. You are not alone. The dim stars guide the way home, and if you're still searching for yours, I promise you, it's out there, waiting for you to find it. This is Victoria Ashford, Major General, Royal Army. And this is my story.